Okay, we'll officially get going. Good evening. I'm Mike Wabacker, the Executive Director of the Schuylkill Center for Environmental Education way up in Roxborough. Hope you come for a walk. Tonight, we are going to be talking about restoring the red knot, horseshoe crab populations, and the Delaware Bay. Can't wait to share that with you. But first, a couple of thoughts. As I mentioned a moment ago, if you missed it, we are recording the event, and we will be uploading this to our YouTube channel. We recommend that you keep your microphone on mute, and of course, your video turned off. If you don't want to be visible. We actually are screen sharing tonight, so the fourth bullet point, I'm sorry, was from another presentation, so you don't want to be in speaker view, you do want to make sure you can see the screen, so do that. However, what is correct is during the entire presentation, make sure to put your questions in chat when we get to the end. This is the second in a 6-week series of Thursday Night Lives, kind of our spring semester. So next week, Billy Brown, he's a writer for Grid Magazine, does an urban wildlife podcast, great naturalist. He's what he calls himself a herper, people who love to look for snakes, toads, turtles, frogs. So herpetology is the study of reptiles and amphibians. So herpers are what they call themselves. He's a great amateur herpetologist. Really knowledgeable about the reptiles and amphibians of our city. So snakes, turtles, and toads, oh my, next week at this time. And then in 2 weeks, Sarah Dykman is an outdoor educator who took a year off, and essentially she traveled the entire migration route of the monarch butterfly. So she started on a bicycle, and she wrote a book called Bicycling with Butterflies. She began her trek, 10,201 miles. She began her trek in the mountains of Mexico and then followed the migration north. She went as far as Canada, circled back and went back to them where they, in the fall migration in November. So I'm reading the book right now. She'll be here with us in 2 weeks. And I can't wait to present to you Sarah Dykman, Bicycling with Butterflies. If you are new to the Schuylkill Center, that's wonderful. We are up in Upper Roxborough, 340 acres of forest, 4 miles of trails. We are free. Come for a walk. We've got a great visitor center that you can visit as well. So come see the visitor center, come see our trails, come for a walk. Love to have you. Like I said, we're free. We are an environmental education center. We've been doing programming for people of all ages since the 1960s. So school programs are one of the most important things that we've been doing for all of that time, but we run a fabulous summer camp that is very popular. We do these Thursday Night Live presentations with you, nature walks, field trips, hikes, all kinds of things. So check out our calendar online. We operate Nature Preschool now in its 9th year. A couple of our preschool teachers are here, so a shout out to them for doing this with us tonight. But Nature Preschool was the first nature-based preschool in the state of Pennsylvania, which we are proud to say. And the kids are outside pretty much most of the day, every day, even in the winter. So we're so happy to present Nature Preschool. It's so great for the kids, and I'm so thrilled that a couple of the teachers are here. Welcome. We also operate one of the most ambitious environmental art programs of any nature center in the country. The next show is called Companions. It's opening in April, on April 16th, and has a foraging walk to go along with it. So Companions is an exhibit created, an installation, indoor and outdoor components created by Filipino-American artists. So go check that out on our website. Do come to the opening. Love to have you for that as well. We also have outdoor exhibitions, as I said. This is the Mudif. It's an Iraqi guest house built with Phragmites reeds. Last year, on Memorial Day, we started building the first Mudif outside of Iraq in 5,000 years. So in 5,000 years of Iraqi history, it had always been built in Iraq. So we did one in Roxborough, amazingly enough. This year at Memorial Day, we're having a ceremonial taking down of the Mudif. Since it's weathered, Reefs were built for arid climates, not for wet, cold, changing temperatures, windy weather of Roxborough and Philadelphia. So actually, we're going to be doing a ceremonial taking down on Memorial Day weekend. So do check that out as well. It was an extraordinary year in that the Mudeef brought together Iraqi immigrants in Philadelphia, plus veterans of the Iraq and Afghanistan wars, who did some healing ceremonies and services inside the Mudeef. So we're thrilled, we're honored to create that. Love to have you for the deinstallation of the Mudeef. We also operate the only wildlife clinic in the city of Philadelphia, one of the few in the region. Thousands of injured, orphaned, sick animals of all kinds, more than 100 species. Baby squirrels have started coming to the wildlife clinic. So it's baby squirrel season, and that's our #1 client at the wildlife clinic, baby squirrels. Birds who occasionally strike windows and are stunned, like this evening, grosbeak also are one of the animals that we service. And there's actually a program called Bird Safe Philly, where volunteers are scouring the center city looking for birds who've hit glass windows in skyscrapers, and the birds who are stunned are brought to our clinic, where they revive and are let go. So we're thrilled to have a wildlife clinic. Toad Detour is a great volunteer program. Toads wake up on our 300-acre forest, and when they wake up from a long winter's nap, they want to get across Port Royal Avenue to a reservoir that's now actually a park. And they have to climb up this side of this sort of embankment to get down into the reservoir. So their inclination when they wake up from hibernation is to get to water, where the males sing, they mate, lay eggs, and the cycle of life continues. So in those warm, rainy nights of spring, the toads wake up and cross Port Royal and try to get into the reservoir. So I think this is going to be a good tow night, actually. I think later tonight, if this thunderstorm comes, that's going to be great conditions for toads. So we do have a volunteer program that helps the toads cross the road. We closed down Port Royal Avenue. Toad Detour has its own Facebook page. So check out the toads on Facebook, and actually you might get a sense if they're running or not. They might not be now if it's not raining, but I think if the rain starts, they might start moving as well. I mentioned we are a volunteer program. Toad Detour is a great volunteer program. We do lots of tree planting, especially in the spring and fall seasons. The Philly Fanatic joined us a couple of Earth Days ago before the pandemic and helped us plant this tree. So check out our volunteer opportunities on our website. We're also a membership-based organization. If you're a member of the Schuylkill Center, thank you so much. We appreciate your support so much. We count on our members to support us. It's an important way that the organization moves forward. As a member, in return, you get lots of benefits, including program discounts, advance notice, and discounts in our gift shop, which has the best birdseed in the Delaware Valley. So check out membership. You can join online. And again, for our members who are here, thank you so, so much. So tonight we're here to talk about an extraordinary conservation story, one of the most important ones. And I'm really pleased to present to you our special guest. So to ease our way into this story, and Larry, I hope I'm not going to give away much of the story, but in an extraordinary confluence of ecological timing, each May thousands of red knots, a 9-inch sandpiper with a terracotta belly, lands on Delaware Bay beaches, a key stopover on their 10,000-mile trip from South America to nesting sites in the Arctic Circle. Famished and exhausted, the knots arrive just when horseshoe crabs have pulled themselves onto those same beaches to lay eggs. Billions of fat, rich, BB-sized eggs giving knots the energy they need to finish the trip. But in recent decades, knot populations have plummeted from the overharvesting of horseshoe crabs, and the conservation community has sounded the alarm about this bird and the horseshoe crabs in the bay. Dr. Lawrence Niles, the world's expert in untangling the knot story, shares the bird's astonishing migration, its threats, long-term trends, and strategies for saving bird, crab, and bay ecosystem. Lowry started his 40-year career as a regional game biologist in Georgia, and then spent 25 years as New Jersey's chief of endangered and non-species program. In 2006, he started his own company to pursue independent research and habitat restoration in Delaware Bay and elsewhere, and is a founding member of the Horseshoe Crab Recovery Coalition. The Schuylkill Center is making a donation to the coalition in honor of Larry's work And with thanks for this presentation. And when Larry starts his lecture, I'll place the group's website in chat so you can support this important work too. And speaking of chat, place your questions there anytime. And when Larry finishes the lecture, I'll read your questions to him. Dr. Lawrence Niles, thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate it so very much.
Thank you. Thank you for the introduction, Mike. So I want to thank the Schuylkill Center for having me. I was reading your newsletter, and it says that this is the year of restoration, which is very appropriate to this talk. What this talk concludes is that we can fix this. I'm going to start with just a brief primer on the migratory ecology of knots. I'm going to go through our tracking study, 3 different technologies, and then sort of what that showed us about the Arctic breeding area, the stopover on the Atlantic coast, and the southbound migration, all the way down to Tierra del Fuego, and then starting back up again, a stopover in Brazil, where they jump off and they go on to the Delaware Bay. Then I'll talk about what we're trying to do to fix the problems that you'll see. So this is, when you think about red knots, you think from the top of the earth down, because they migrate in each of the major byways down to the most extreme portions. This is a graph done by Tunis Piersma from University of Groningen, which shows not only the migrations, but also each of the major stopovers that where the birds use to get from one place to the other, including Delaware Bay. And so you see how big Delaware Bay is. So at this time, we had, our data showed about 4.6 grams a day. So a bird could build up that much weight each day. And now we're up to about 6 grams a day, which is double all of the other stopovers. So that's how important the Delaware Bay is to the bird. Just a great shot of all the species by Jan van der Kam. You could see down here is some semi-palmated sandpipers. There's some sanderling, red knots, of course, a few ruddy turnstones, and there's one dunlin up here. And then there's also short-billed dowitchers. So that's all the species that come to the bay every year. The way that we catch them, we've used mist nets, but they don't usually work very well for knots. So we use something called a cannon net, mainly because the net gets out there really quick. And you can see in this picture how the birds all have their wings up. If the birds were up here, you see that would be a problem. So getting the net out really quickly, that's how we put on these tracking devices. So the first one is called a light sensitive geolocator. It has a little light sensitive thing right here. And it doesn't transmit, it just records light. And it determines location in the same way a sextant would. So it's, you know, a sort of estimate of latitude and longitude. And you see, this is very crude. It's the very beginning. We're just attaching these to leg bands. But see, this gave us the first understanding of really the massive migration that's going on. This was one bird, YOY, and you can see it flew for 9 hours on the southbound, on the northbound, and 134 miles, sorry, on the northbound, 134 hours. It's like, you know, that to me is just amazing. That's like almost 6 days long, just constant flying. The next way is called a nanotag, and we were one of the first species to use this emerging technology, which is it's just a short distance VHF transmitter, but they got it really small. They're using a lot on passerines now, and but we in this application it's sort of limited because you have to have towers, and there's over 1,000 towers in the East Coast now, all the way down through South America. We put towers down in Tierra del Fuego, and we got good data. This is one of the uses was to figure out if the emerging wind power farms are going to impact red knots in their migration. But where we're doing a lot of work right now is on satellite tags. And here we're attaching tags right here. We glue them on. We've been experimenting with other methods. So these tags, they're limited in that they can only get 60 points, but the points are exact. And it's very useful to us in a variety of ways. Like here's the track here of a bird that we attached a transmitter on in Delaware Bay. And this red line show you the back and forth migration. We got it all the way up to the breeding area and then back down to the Atlantic coast stopover. So I'll show that in a bit. But see how the detailed the movements were up in the Arctic. And then we also got data for the movements in the stopover, the Atlantic coast stopover. This is just by Atlantic City. And see, these locations are so detailed. I'll show more of this later, but the detail is so great that it allows us to protect these sites. See, here's another one of a bird going down to French Guiana, and we got movement down there in an area where there's virtually no data. And then we got all this movement that is occurring at Brigantine. And see, we can put this into a system that protects these sites, or at least is used in the review of permits, things like that. Another use is the altitude. And see, this is really interesting. We're just getting to it. But you could see that here's the movement of altitude. So this is just over time. This is altitude. You can see the birds constantly moving up and down. And if you look at this, this is wind speed and direction. You could see that the birds are moving up and down to find the following wind. There's only one portion of the flight where it had to oppose a wind. And all these others, it was a beneficial wind. So they're moving thousands and thousands of feet up and down. So now I'm going to talk about the places. This map here is the compilation of all the geolocator tracks that we did. So it's a pretty map. It was done by Wendy Walsh at the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. So this is a gruesome picture. I got to show it to you because it really tells you something about why red knots can do this flight. See, they're not just, most migrating birds only really gain about 10% of their body weight. I did my PhD on migratory raptors, and the most they would do was about 10% because they're doing short flights and they could more or less depend that the next place that they stop would have food. The knots, they actually absorb their organs of digestion just so they could get that little bit more fat on, and then they increase the size of their flight muscles. So they're like machines trying to make these very distant flights. But see, they have to still balance that with the fact that the fatter they get, the more vulnerable they become. And see, that's the way it is for all shorebirds and all stopovers. They have to balance that need for weight to get from one place to another with the vulnerability that just comes with having all that fat. So I'm going to start with the Arctic breeding area. This adult brooding chicks. Okay. Now the birds are mostly nesting in this area. I just wanted to put this in reference. We're down here, of course. This is a map from a paper we did where we put transmitters on the birds in Delaware Bay. This is in the early 2000s. And they had short tracking distance. So the plane had about 8 miles on each side with the antennas. This gray area shows you the plane's track. And so you can see that we did this flight. Each of these triangles are where we located birds. So this is generally the breeding area. We had to do this because in the beginning of the collapse of the horseshoe crab population, which I'm going to finish up with, the fishers were saying, hey, listen, it's not us killing the crabs, it's the Arctic. And they say, oh, it's the Tierra del Fuego wintering area. And so we mounted projects with the help of Dodge Foundation we went to about 8 years down in Tierra del Fuego and about 8 years up in the Arctic. And we found that, there's changes going on in these places, but not causing the dramatic changes that we eventually saw. I'll eventually talk to you about. So this is the habitat here in the Arctic. It's actually desert. It only gets about 13 inches a year, mostly snow, but there is rain. And so it's a barren area, which is a good defense for the knots because they just sort of spread out, in very low density. We were getting about one nest every square kilometer, so they're spaced out. Here you can see the eggs of a nest. This bird sitting on eggs. A brooding bird. And then here's the chicks. The chicks are precocial, and so only about a day, and they're following the adult. The female leaves. She goes on right after the chicks follow the male, and then as soon as they get to fledgling age, then the male takes off, and eventually the chicks do. A lot of predators. Like predation is the thing in the Arctic, and it's one reason why knots are in that very barren habitat, because it's not there's not enough resource there for the predators to search it. So that's their first defense. But there's Arctic fox, there's long-tailed yagers, there's actually all 3 yagers species, and then snowy owl. The birds leave the Arctic and they come down to the coastal area. So we know of 3 sites. One is in Mingan Islands in Gulf of St. Lawrence in Canada, Quebec. And then there's 2 in New Jersey, 2 in the mid-Atlantic. One is at Monomoy Refuge at Cape Cod. And then there's 2 in New Jersey at Brigantine and Stone Harbor. This is Stone Harbor. You can see with the thread there because the birds are coming down in August. So this is the peak time for recreation beaches in New Jersey. In this stopover, we get both short distance and long distance knots. So it's the knots that either go to the wintering areas in Florida and the Caribbean, which we're calling short distance because they just hop down the coast. They don't make big, long ocean flights. They don't build up weight like the birds that have to go to Tierra del Fuego. And then we have the long distance birds. Like here, you can see a bird that we banded in Chile. Now, in the southbound stopovers, the birds are building weight just like in the northbound. So this bird here probably weighs somewhere in the area of 200 grams. And we've caught birds up to 240 grams in the Brigantine. And a fat-free weight for a knot is about 125 grams. So this is a big, a lot of weight, makes them very vulnerable. And see, we could tell the long and short distance birds because of this, because of molt patterns in the flight feathers. It's a long distance bird. They don't molt their flight feathers until they get to the wintering area. So they're flying with, worn out feathers that they just live with as they make their way, 10,000 miles. This is a short distance bird. You can see that she's molding her flight feathers here. She's very different strategy for these birds. Most of the long distance birds leave the stopover before September. If I was in an audience, I would ask people now why they think that would be. And I'll answer that in a bit. So the long distance birds are out by beginning of September. The short distance birds actually molt their flight feathers in the stopover. They don't leave until usually until about December. And then the third group of birds we see in the stopover are the juveniles. You can tell these birds because they have these brand new feathers. They're really beautiful birds, all the detail. So this is the problem. We now have peregrines nesting on the Atlantic coast. See, the strategy that the birds were following was basically discovered by a researcher out in the West Coast, where they learned that Dunlin and Western sandpipers timed their migration around the peregrine migration. The Western sandpipers would go before it started and the Dunlin would go after. We think that the knots, the short distance birds, are going after the peregrine migration, and the long distance birds are leaving before. The thing that messed it all up was, I have to take some credit. We restored peregrine falcons, and this project started when I was with the New Jersey Endangered Species Program, and we established peregrines on the coast because you couldn't do it in the cliffs where they originally occurred because great horned owls were killing all the young birds. So we did it out in the coast. The problem was they came back and they nested in the towers. So now we got peregrines in the spring stopover in Delaware Bay, where the birds didn't evolve to deal with that. And we have them in the southbound stopover. I'll talk a bit more about that later. I'm not going to say much about the Florida stopover. This is the problem, but it's not that much of an issue because birds can move wherever they want. So there's birds in Cuba and most of the Caribbean islands. So there's a lot of, the winter population doesn't use a lot of energy. They just have to keep their weight up. I want to talk about the wintering area in Bahia Lomas in Chile, in Tierra del Fuego. So this is Chile here, and then Argentina. Bahia Lomas is right here, right at the tip. This is Cape Horn out here. So before the red knot population declined, there were small populations of these long distance birds all along the coast here, up through Argentina. But as the decline occurred, they all collapsed down into this one bay, Bahia Lomas. There's both knots and Hudsonian godwits in this flock. It's a major wintering area for both species. This is very good because when we first went there, we had to sort of deal with the Atlantic States Marine Fisheries Commission, who was saying it wasn't the problem in Delaware Bay, it was the problem in Tierra del Fuego. Hudsonian godwits don't go through the Delaware Bay. So we could compare these two populations, and we found that the knots were declining and the Hudsonian godwits were not. Now, the reason it's such a great place for the birds to winter is that there's a 30-foot tide here, and Bahia Lomas has a 5-kilometer wide intertidal zone. So you can see the birds right here. They're just moving in and out with the tide every day. There's plenty of clams all along the shoreline. It's a great place to winter. We found that the population in Tierra del Fuego had crashed from about 65,000 birds. It's down to as little as 9,000. Right now, it's about 14,000. So now the birds are leaving Lago de Pech through, Tierra del Fuego. They're hopping up the coast, and then they get to Lago de Pech, Brazil. That's where they're going to make the flight to Delaware Bay. So they go up the coast here to Lago de Pech. And Lago de Pech is basically a lagoon and then really wild beaches. This lagoon supports a local fishery for small shrimp, like bay shrimp. And but most of the area is unpopulated. What's unusual about this place is the tide. So this map shows, here's the continent, and then each of these are the tidal ranges. So the darker it is, the bigger the tidal range. So you could see Tierra del Fuego here is black. And you can see the Gulf of Mexico is light because there's only about a 2-foot tide. And see, now you can see why the birds are at Lago de Pech. It's only a 2-foot tide, but it has Atlantic coast level productivity. So really abundant clams in this area, so they're able to build up. Problems here are hard we're not sure yet. We're working with the team down there with the UNISO's university. Disturbance is a problem because people are just using the beach as a road. But there might be a bigger problem with contaminants because we found birds that were struggling, like this knot couldn't escape these scavenger caracaras. So something was making the birds sick. Possibly that it's red tides like they have in Florida and Texas. I've been in red tides in Texas, and the toxins from the dead fish just impair everything. We had dead knots there from the red tides in Texas. So we're not sure what's going on here, but just another threat. So now Delaware Bay, this is now we're completing the circle. Once they leave Delaware Bay, they go on to the Arctic. The big thing about Delaware Bay is that it has the largest horseshoe crab population in the world. And it's basically because of the bay has this just perfect conditions for crabs. The whole bay is an average of about 12 feet deep. It has the channel in the center. So it warms up quickly, and that means that the crabs and the birds sort of link up well. The people who live in Delaware Bay have always considered horseshoe crabs worthless. They used them as fertilizer until there were chemical fertilizers available. And then in a sort of version of that, during the 70s and 80s, a lot of the Atlantic coast fisheries were collapsing. Cod fishery was collapsing in New England. They started looking for something else. They started taking conch because they were shipping it overseas and it were making money. They needed bait, so they started taking horseshoe crabs. By 1998, they were taking 2.5 million. They're still taking crabs now at about this level. We're trying to stop them. I'm going to finish off with that, with the Horseshoe Crab Coalition. This is what it looks like. Numbers are hard to imagine. This was a film done in 1986 before they overharvested the crabs. This is what it looks like now. And this is the best of conditions. See, it's a big difference here. First of all, when you get to the eggs at this level, at the upper level, they're baked into the beach. So it doesn't matter what happens. It could be cold water. Crabs could stop spawning for some reason, but the eggs that are buried in the sand are just going to continually coming out because of wave action. What happens now is that any perturbation in the system is going to stop things, and then the birds suffer. So that happened in 2020. The water got cold, the horseshoe crab spawn stopped dead, and there was nothing for the birds. In 1987, there was a cold year, and there was no impact just because of that superabundance of eggs. So red knots crashed along, what we were seeing in Cerro del Fuego was the reaction to Delaware Bay. Last year, we saw 6,800 knots. That doesn't mean that the population has crashed down to there. It's very likely that we're still at this level, but, and the birds just had to find somewhere else. See, the problem is there's increased mortality because they're trying to find somewhere else because Delaware Bay is the best. So what's the solution? How are we going to fix this for the future? I mean, that's what we're thinking about. How do you fix a problem like this that has so many different aspects? It's overwhelming. See, the answer is this. It comes from the crabs themselves. Now, see, we were wrong when we started our project and we were all about protecting the birds, because the main value of horseshoe crabs was to the estuary itself. It wasn't to the birds. Those eggs, most of those eggs that you saw in that clip, they were going into the sea. And once the eggs that were buried, once they hatched, they're feeding fish. You see all these minnows coming in and feeding on these young horseshoe crabs. See, the horseshoe crab was a dynamo of energy for the Delaware Bay ecosystem. It wasn't just, they weren't just helping horseshoe crabs, they were energizing the entire ecosystem. Now, the guy who is generally considered to be sort of the grandfather of horseshoe crabs on Delaware Bay is Carl Schuster. And in 1960s, he recognized this. He found that fish were feeding on all these fish were feeding on the eggs. And see, what's important is it was the eels, the killifish, the silver sides. They were feeding the sport fish. And see, we can't get the fisheries agencies to recognize this. Now, I want you to recognize this as the sign of hope, because all of the cheekbones are still there. It's just bad management that's going on right now. So look at what happened to weakfish. Weakfish were like the engine of Delaware Bay economy. They were, all the marinas were filled up with boats, restaurants, motels. Delaware Bay was a place equal to the Atlantic coast, but for sportsmen, they're fishers. In the early 90s, Delaware, New Jersey was taking upwards of 3 million pounds of weakfish a year. Now they're taking 44,000. We can't get the fisheries agency to recognize that the crab was the problem. If you ask the state fisheries or federal fisheries people, what's the problem with weakfish, they'll tell you something like, oh, there's too many dolphins. Because they won't recognize the crab as the engine of productivity for Delaware Bay. So the solution, in other words, is to restore the crab. And it isn't just restore the crab in Delaware Bay. It's restore the crab in every place that they occur. There's horseshoe crab populations from Maine to Florida. And see, it's our theory without any evidence, because it was all lost before anybody collected evidence, is that the shorebirds weren't concentrated in Delaware Bay. They were using stopovers all along the Atlantic coast because they were fertile. There was abundant resources in all the estuarine systems. And so that's why we started the Horseshoe Crab Recovery Coalition. We're at 45 groups right now, a wide variety of groups, from the Anglers Conservation Network to the Humane Society, I mean, and everybody in between, NRDC, Delaware River Keeper, American Littoral Society. Susan Linder is on she's on video there, and she works on horseshoe crabs. She's a colleague that's part of the Horseshoe Crab Coalition. See, our goal is to increase horseshoe crabs everywhere they occur. So like this year, we're establishing 6 state groups. And so, and each of those state groups are going to conduct surveys, they're going to do stewardship for shorebirds and so on. Yeah, I didn't cover all the issues here because there's too many. Like the horseshoe crab, like everybody thinks the horseshoe crab is valuable because of bait, but that's the secret that multinational companies are trying to hide. The real value of horseshoe crabs is their blood. I mean, a crab is worth about $5 as bait. For blood, we don't know what the estimate is because they keep all the data secret, but we estimate it somewhere about $300 a crab per year. And these people won't participate in restoration, they're hiding. Go to the state newspaper, it's a South Carolina newspaper, and follow the articles by Kira Eisner of the bleeding company that bleeds half the horseshoe crabs. Or over 600,000 crabs are bled a year. And this one company is doing half of it. Read about how good a company they are. Anyway, I think we're going to solve this. And I think the reason is because of what I said about the horseshoe crabs. For Delaware Bay, I think the reason is because all the structure of the bay still exists. Most of the marsh is publicly owned. There's groups like American Littoral Society, Fish and Wildlife Service, trying to restore habitat. Now it's like all this, the bones are there. We just got to change the management, and the best way to do that is with your help. Thank you.
Larry, thank you so much. If you have questions, please put them in chat. There are some already. I'll get to them in a moment. Larry, can I ask an overarching question to kind of begin?
Sure.
Why and how does a 10,000-mile migration evolve? Like, it's so much work for the bird. I'm curious about the why of it. How did that evolve, that it has to go from Terra del Fuego to the Arctic Circle?
Yeah, it's a good question, Mike. It's one that is, subject of researchers worldwide. Like the knot has it has a following, like not just wildlife people, but there's a lot of smart people that enjoy tagging red knots, banding them, that sort of thing, because their migration is a puzzle. And so the best idea right now is that, you look at it in terms of fitness. So, a bird is maximizing fitness. Fitness is like the ability to make young. And so the birds that go to Terra del Fuego lose fitness because they have that long migration. But they gain fitness because it's identical to the Arctic. There's no parasites, there's no diseases, there's no red tide. The birds that go south to Florida or Caribbean, they gain fitness because it's shorter, but they lose it because parasite diseases. And so it's an important aspect for conservation, because the impact of not caring for these stopovers is that the long distance knots have plummeted. They're now 1/6 of their population, but the short distance birds have stayed more or less the same because they don't have the same threat. But they have the long-term threat. Like if we put all our eggs essentially in short distance basket and there's a red tide in the main wintering area, that's the end of it. You've lost your species. So the long run, it's better to do that long migration.
That's great, thank you. So keep putting questions in. I'll start getting to them now. And it's like 10 up. We'll go until just like 5 after 8. Jenny and Paul want to know what determines which bird is short or long term. How does the bird know which way to go? How far?
Another good question. See, we know that there's morphological distance that's different in the bird. So we know that it's genetic. So it's not just like a bird that goes to Brazil, a bird that goes to Cerro del Fuego, a bird that goes to Florida. They all have different beak sizes or wing sizes. And so that means there has to be distinction in the Arctic, because that's the only way that you can have genetic distinction. In reality, like if you have a bird in August, it's not molting, you can't tell if it's long or short, because it could be flying to the Florida wintering area and then molting there, or it could go to Cerro del Fuego and it could molt there. But see, it still allows us, the birds that do molt in the stopover in Brigantine, Atlantic Stone Harbor, or Monomoy, if it's molting, we know it's short distance. If it's not molting, it could still be going to Florida.
Thank you. Eric has a question that I had as well about the peregrine falcons. Did you say that they hadn't normally evolved in that environment? Or that they weren't there prior because of avoiding predation by owls?
Yeah, see, so I worked on peregrines when I was a young biologist.
Yeah.
The eastern population was extirpated, and so the object was to get them back. And because there were no breeding pairs, you couldn't just manage your way out of it. So they had to be hatched. In other words, the young eyases had to be raised in a box, and then when they reached fledging age, they would fledge on their own. So that way, eventually they would come back. So when they first did it, the Peregrine Fund first did it, they tried to hatch birds out of boxes in cliffs where all the peregrines nested. Like when there was a population, they were in the water gap. They were up in New Hampshire. They weren't on the coast.
Right.
And so then that didn't work because the great horned owls were eating all the eyases. They couldn't fledge any. So they proposed, and I helped execute, creating boxes out on the marsh because there were no great horned owls. And so eyases could be released. The problem was they came back and started nesting in those towers. So, it was a good idea during the time when there was, it used to be we estimated that there was 1.5 million shorebirds on Delaware Bay in 1980. So a few peregrines didn't make any difference at all. But now we're down to somewhere around 200,000.
Oh my.
And on the Atlantic coast, it's even less. So, now's the time to get rid of the state is still managing peregrines on the Atlantic coast. They're still maintaining the towers. They're checking on them, sort of artificially subsidizing them, and that should end. That's all I'm saying. You can't do anything about migrating peregrines. I mean,
Right.
The birds evolved for that.
Right. Great. Cindy grew up in Cliffwood Beach, Keyport, Raritan Bay, in Monmouth County. There was a large horseshoe population crab when she lived there in the 60s through 2000, she remembers. Would you find any red knots there or any similar migratory birds? So in Monmouth County in northern New Jersey.
Yeah, no, it's a question that's real relevant to our work. Susan is helping to start a state working group, and one of the groups is the Susan, I forget the name of the group that does the work there.
Safe Coastal Wildlife.
Yeah. So if you're interested in helping out on Raritan Bay, that's a group to go to, or to the coalition. Before they were, those crabs are really taking a hit because New York is unrepentant. I mean, they're landing 200,000. They can land up to 200,000 a year. The evidence is that they're taking them from Delaware Bay because there's a genetic evidence is that there's 44% are Delaware Bay origin. The rest are taken from Raritan Bay, very likely, and Jamaica Bay, but that's pretty small. They're keeping the population low. If that stopped, if there was no more bait harvest and there was no more blood kill, that population would get up to egg density again, and it would be a stopover again. No question about it. It's a beautiful bay.
And Cindy also asked, what about the harvesting of horseshoe crab blood and the effects of that? You touched on that. And what's it harvested for? Can you say what it's for? The blood is blue too, right?
Yeah, so they take the blood for the biochemical lysate, which is a biochemical that detects biocontaminants. So basically everything goes in your body, drugs, pacemakers, joint, whatever, it's all tested by lysate. They used to have to use a rabbit. And so this was an advance using horseshoe crab blood. They do an 8-minute bleed. Females, they could take as much as 50% of their blood. The estimates are that there's a significant mortality. The companies, because of a quirk of fisheries rules, get to keep all their data secret. The independent assessment of mortality was 30%. The companies estimate 5%. These are all international companies, Japanese, Swedish. These are not like local mom and pop operations like they pretend.
Right.
And the after bleeding is almost unresearched, and the data that suggests significant mortality as well. It's a $500 million industry. I bristle at the word harvest because harvest implies planning and stewardship, and these people are just, taking. There's no.
Right. And are there new alternatives now for?
Yeah.
Save it. You have something to
Yeah,
save?
thanks for that, Mike. Yeah. There's a new synthetic called RFC. It's actually not new. The patent for it was entered almost 15 years ago. One of the companies bought it and sat on it for 10 years. The patent's now open. Eli Lilly is using it for new products. Pfizer is contemplating it. The European Pharmacopoeia has approved it for all uses. The U.S. Pharmacopoeia, under the influence of the main bleeding company, Charles River, was convinced that it's not equivalent to lysate. The Europeans think it is. The Asians think it is.
Right.
Eli Lilly thinks it is.
And Lilly's part of your coalition, right? I saw their logo. Yeah.
That's right. So this is something that's going to change. Most of the bleeding companies have a synthetic alternative. Only Charles River doesn't. But eventually, this will convert. It's going to take time, though. We were talking to a woman from Humane Society International today, and she said that in foreign countries like India, they're used to LAL. It's coming from here. And so there's a whole system around it. So it's going to take time to change that system. But I think eventually it'll happen.
Good.
See, I think the good thing about it is that once we convert to RFC, I'm pretty sure the bait harvest will end because the bleeders are propping up the bait harvest with shenanigans, like they call it, rent-a-crab program and stuff like that.
Elizabeth wonders if the harvesting rules were recently loosened up, allowing the harvesting of females.
Thank you, Elizabeth, for that. Yes, it's a major battle. So the Atlantic States Marine Fisheries Commission, which is responsible for the management, and the management is actually implemented by each of the states, but the ASMFC determines the quotas. And so I'm on the committee that determines the quota, which has been males only for the last 8 years or something, because there's no increase in the crabs or the birds. Things are worse now than they were 10 years ago, but magically the ASMSC developed a increase. They added new surveys that they eschewed before, and they want to open up the female harvest, which is closed right now. So several groups are aiming to oppose it. I wrote a minority opinion about it, as did the Fish and Wildlife Service member on the ARM committee, but the group went ahead and moved it forward. They're going to approve it this spring meeting, and so then there'll probably be legal battles over that. I can't say much more about that. Still developing.
Good. We're going to go for a few more minutes. Judy wonders about the effects of offshore wind on knots and other migratory shorebirds.
Yeah, these are really good questions. Thank you.
Yeah.
A lot of the satellite work is being funded by the offshore wind companies. I have a small company called Wildlife Restoration Partnership, which Susan is part of as well. And so we've been getting funding and working with the Fish and Wildlife Service on tracking and using satellite transmitters because they're very expensive. And I have to say that I've never really seen that before. As I said, I was part of I was head of the endangered species program. So I did a lot of mitigations and permitting and all that stuff. And I've never seen a sort of collaboration of company and the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, really trying to get to the answer on whether there's an impact, because it's so important to have wind power from a energy standpoint. But we're trying to determine if the birds are over the wind farm. That's the first thing. Whether they're in the altitude, which is the second thing, and whether they actually will get hit by the blade. So it's still an ongoing project, but I think everybody has the perspective that we need to do this. We just got to figure out how.
You got it. Susan Linder, who Larry has mentioned a couple of times, I'll put something in chat about the Safe Coastal Wildlife Organization in Raritan Bay. Check that out. Tracy has some homeschoolers who have some questions. When is the best time to see the red knots in New Jersey, and are they endangered?
Yes, red knots are endangered, which is a really great thing because it opens up all kinds of regulatory protection, and so they get a lot from that. The best time is during the month of May, and the best time in May is like the third week. Second week is
it's a great Mother's Day project.
Yeah, and the third week is where the sort of peak is. Crab spawn is usually the full moon or new moon, so you could just time it. The best thing is to time it with that, and then the birds will very likely be there. The state of New Jersey and American Littoral Society and other groups, the Conserve Wildlife Foundation of New Jersey, have stewards on each of the access points. You could go to either one of those groups to get information on where is the best place. There's stewards there will help you understand. There's some signage, and like we encourage people to come see, kids especially, but at each place there's like a boundary where people can't crawl onto the beach, which is really good because the birds come right up to the boundaries. You can touch horseshoe crabs. It's a good learning experience.
That's great. Are they endangered? Not officially, right? No, I'm sorry. Red knots.
No, red knots are federally threatened, and they're state listed as well. Yeah, that's one of the big sort of bulwarks of the whole protection. If they weren't, it's not just that they're not. It's the protection of red knots, but all the shorebirds sort of carried on the back of the red knot because they're all getting benefits from the protection of stopovers and wintering areas and the research. So
So we'll end on Jerry's question, and I'll first give the statement, then the question. Jerry has watched dories come into the Hyannis docks in Cape Cod with garbage cans full of horseshoe crabs. When they were asked if they would return them to where they took them, they said they're returning them to Woods Hole miles away. And then Jerry wonders, how can we help to stop the harvesting of horseshoe crabs?
Yeah. Massachusetts is, if you look for the places that are killing the most crabs, it's Massachusetts and Maryland. We're having a hard time getting things going in Massachusetts. Like, South Carolina, Georgia, state groups are vibrant, Maryland, Delaware. Massachusetts, really hard to get action.
Wow.
I guess I would say try to work through Mass Audubon. It's a good group with limited focus on. The problem is the bleeding companies like Charles River and Cape Cod Associates are housed in Massachusetts, so they got a real big political influence.
Yeah.
You got a big row to hoe there.
Yeah. And there's some more comments in chat about.
Go to the Horseshoe Crab website, and we'll try to steer you to a good place. Yep.
Good.
Everybody should think that.
Dr. Niles, thank you so much for giving us this update tonight. We so appreciate it. And thank you for many, many decades of work on this important, extraordinary conservation story. Thank you, Larry.
Thank you very much. It was my pleasure to give that talk.
And everybody, my favorite portion of the evening, feel free to unmute yourself and thank Larry for his work and for the program tonight. So feel free to unmute and offer your thanks.
Thank you so much.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Larry.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for sharing your knowledge, Larry.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Appreciate that.
From Massachusetts, so we need your help.
Yes.
Well, we're actually going to Massachusetts in August to trap with Fish and Wildlife Service.
Good.
Oh,
We're
really?
working there. Yeah.
Okay, the problem is
Yep.
is huge, as you said there.
Huge.
Very huge.
Thank you for zooming in from Massachusetts. Thank you so much.
Yes,
Thank you.
yes. We want to
Come see the Delaware
We need all
Bay.
the ideas we can get.
You got it. Thank you for your work.
Thank you.
Thanks for your
Thank
work.
you.
Thanks for your work. Yeah.
My pleasure. All right. Thank you, everybody. Have a great night.
Bye.
And again, Larry,
Thank
thank you so
you.
much. Thank you all.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye-bye.